I don't know about you, but I'm a devotee of the old Law and Order reruns. I watch them all the time. And my wife will shake her head and say, that's true, he does. Doesn't do much else, he just watches Law and Order. And, well, you like it because, more times than not, the good guys win. And, I like to see somebody win, Obviously, the Yankees aren't going to do it this year, so you got to pick for somebody to cheer on. That's right, nobody will know my pain. But one of the interesting things, when the cops go and get the bad guy, inevitably they get the bad guy and they throw the cuffs on him, right? And what does the bad guy say? I didn't do nothing. And they take him down and going to question him as he's going out in cuffs. Not unlike what you just heard in the gospel a moment ago. You have poor Dives, or the rich man, in torment in Hades, and you have Lazarus in heaven, and Dives can't quite figure it out, how everything got turned around, and so he's saying, I didn't do nothing, and here I am. And Father Abraham is saying, that's right, you didn't do anything, and that's why you're there where you are. And that's the end of that sermon for today. Let's move on. No. But the fact of the matter is, that's exactly what happened. And when Jesus is telling the story, if you remember last week, and all of you were here last week, I counted heads. Last week, he went on to, Jesus was challenging the people of God, and he said, you know what? You Pharisees and scribes, you think you have it all wrapped up. You see, you know the law, and you're very reverential when you're in synagogue on Sabbath, and when you go to the temple and offer your sacrifices, you're doing all the right things there, and that's good too. And you keep that level where people are real happy with you on this one level, this one plane, if you will. And you think you're pretty well satisfied, self-satisfied, if you will. And you have some money behind you, and you have some power and wealth, and people will bow to you as you walk through the neighborhood and throughout the streets. But there's more to life. And they're left scratching their heads and saying, listen, we've got the essence of the American dream transported to Israel. And he said, wait a minute, let me tell you a story. There was a rich man who sumptuous wonderfully at his table every day. He was dressed in fine purple and linens. And there was a poor man outside the gate, beyond the guard, in the gutter. People stepped over him. He smelled. He had sores. Even the dogs came and did better to him than you did. They came and licked his sores. He begged for crumbs falling on your table. You didn't even see him. Then he died. And the angels bore him up into heaven, into the bosom of Abraham. And then you're here. And now you're in a place of eternal torment. And the great chasm is fixed between us. I love that. Even in the King James, it said a great chasm is fixed. I remember hearing this gospel in the old prayer book days. You remember the old prayer book? This is one of the gospels in the Sundays after Trinity. The old people don't even remember that. Trinity what? But it was Sundays after Trinity. This is when it started. As a kid, I remember hearing the story and thinking, wow, here he is in the bosom of Abraham, and whatever that meant, and he's in a good place. He's in a good place. And here is the rich man, and he's in a bad place. And there's a great chasm fixed. And he can't go up, and they can't come down. Why would they want to come down? Even as a kid, I'm figuring out, why would he want to come down? And so the rich man says to Abraham, he says, have Lazarus come and dip his finger in the cold water and come down and touch my tongue, and I will be relieved. The guy still thinks he's in charge. He thinks he's got the world. He's missed out. Somebody has to tell him, you died. You're down in hell. Live with that. Meanwhile, he's trying to have this conversation with Abraham. He's trying to debate with Abraham. He's trying to undo all his whole life has meant. And then he says, all right, well, listen, if he can't come to see me, send Lazarus. He still thinks he's in charge. Send Lazarus to my family. Like Lazarus really wants to go hang out with these people. He said, go and tell them that I'm in a terrible place and they better get their lives together so they don't wind up down here with me. And Abraham said, I love this. He said, child, he says, you're missing this. You do not understand anything that's being said. And he's left looking and he's saying, well, he said, there's a great chasm fixed. He said, they got Moses and the prophets. They have the law and the prophets. Let them read that. In the law and the prophets, do you know, we got a lot of stuff in the law and prophets. Most of us stop at Leviticus. We just find it's too horrible to read anymore. But read beyond that, and you find that in the Torah, orphans and widows have primary care. There is no Obamacare. There's no safety net. There's no Social Security. There's just us. Do you know that there is a law that says when they go harvesting the field, they're supposed to leave whatever is gleaned, whatever is left on the ground. Don't bother cleaning the whole field. Leave it so the poor can come and pick whatever's left there so they have something to eat. Do you know that the resident alien, those who are not of the Jewish faith or of the people of Israel, they still are to be taken care of and shown every courtesy? Do you know even a slave in your home is to be treated with kindness and understanding? That's what the Torah says. Dives seems to have missed that. And his brother seems to have missed that. So then Dives, he keeps pushing though. You got to admire the guy's temerity. He keeps pushing. And he says, well, if someone were to come back from the dead, then they'll understand. And Abraham says, wait a minute. He said, if they're not going to be Moses and the prophets, if they're not going to look at their tradition, if they're not going to listen to the people and hear the voices of the poor, he says, how are they going to believe something coming back from the dead? Suppose I send Lazarus back. You know what it is nowadays. Somebody comes back and you sit and say, God, that looks like Lazarus. Nah, it couldn't be. Lazarus is dead. We saw him put in the ground. Oh, no, that's him. Looks just like him. Or in the book of Acts, there's a great story about where Peter comes back. And he said, it's Peter at the door. He says, no, it's his angel. I mean, we find out all sorts of excuses because we can't accept the obvious. We can't accept the miracle. We can't accept the good news. So Dives simply says, if someone were to come back from the dead. I was coming home from a funeral one day, riding with the funeral director, and it was a very powerful, very emotional day, and we're riding back, and funeral director, you have that uneasy silence, you're riding back, and I'm thinking to myself, well, I want to get in the office, I want to do this, I want to do that, I'm going to go out tonight for dinner, just get me home, kind of thing. He's sitting there thinking, I got another funeral to do, I got to do this, I got to do that, But it's that quiet, as you're riding in the car, you got to say something, you feel you have to say something. So he says, it would certainly make my job a lot easier if someone were to come back and just tell us everything's okay. I'm looking around, and I'm thinking to myself, I said, what did we just do for the last 2.5 hours? Somebody did come back. That's what we preach. That's what we're about. And then he caught himself and turned red. He said, well, yeah, of course, That's the statement of faith that's being made in this story. That's the power of the resurrection moment. That's the good news that's being brought out. Somewhere along the line, the rich man forgot the law and the prophets. Somewhere along the line, the rich man forgot that sense of human kindness. One of my favorite Christmas movies is the musical version of Scrooge. Have you ever seen that with Albert Finney? All right? A lot of singing and dancing going on. Well, when the ghost of Christmas present comes, Kenneth Moore plays Ghost of Christmas Present. He's got the crew, Father Christmas. He's got the big hat and things like this. And he looks at Scrooge and he looks at me and says, "You worm! Look at you! You're nothing." And he says, "You have no sense of human decency. You have no." He says, "But I want to. How when we get caught with our, we want to be nice. Then he says, "Here, Scrooge, drink this." He says, "What is it you're making me drink?" He says, "It's the milk of human kindness, something you've never tasted in your life." And he drinks it, of course, and he starts gubbling and everything. He starts singing, "Thank you very much," and he starts everybody dancing around the thing. What is powerful about that story on a couple of levels. Number one, it's a secular story written by Charles Dickens. It had different serializations in local papers in the mid-century, 19th century London. It also showed the power of the Christmas story. It showed the fact of new birth. It showed the fact of rebirth, if you will. It showed the fact of the incarnation. It showed the fact that people's lives could be redeemed, even in the most difficult of times. But you had to meet God halfway. You had to be there somewhere along the line. The opening scene when Jacob Marley comes and he's got his chains, and he says, "What are you doing with those chains?" He said, "I've been knitting this since the day I started business." He said, "And I saw yours, and yours is getting longer than this." And we laugh when we hear that and we see those stories depicted. But you think about it, in a secular setting, what Dickens was putting out there really was the Christian message. What he's putting out there was that sense that at Christmas time and other times of the year, all times of the year, every day of our lives, if you will, is to recognize the poor and the vulnerable. It's to recognize that we can't live our lives only on this plane. That we have to take the risk and dive down into where humanity lives. We have to go to the gate and bind the sores and feed the hungry and help those that have no one to help them. The most vulnerable in our society is how we are to live. All Ebenezer Scrooge could care about was what? Making money. And he was very good at that. Jacob Marley before him was good at making money. What the Pharisees and the Sadducees wanted was to make money and was to keep things going just like it was. If they didn't have to look down and get into the depths of humanity, that was fine. They liked being on this one level with everybody that they knew and everybody scratched each other's back. But that's not the power of the gospel message. That's not how we are called to live. We are called as the people of God to live and dare to risk everything that we have so that those who are most vulnerable can be lifted up. Because you know what? For the grace of God, there walk I. There walk you. To understand the fact how God's presence gets lived out is it gets lived out how the people of God reach out in love and concern for one another. That's what we are about. That's what the story has such power. The rich man reaches out and he says, it just blows your mind. You reread this story and you start thinking the fact, this guy thinks he's still running the show. He still thinks he's got all the answers. And when they ask him, he says, I didn't do nothing. Yo, you didn't do nothing. You didn't do anything. You didn't care about anybody except yourself. The thing that allows our faith to grow, not our religion, but our faith, is the fact that we dare to risk it all in order to be vulnerable to the world that's around us. Does that mean we're fools for Christ? Sometimes we are. I can't tell you about the people that come to this door looking for the church to help them out. Not a handout, but someone to help them out. When they've gone to the very end, everything's been taken away from them. They come to the church and say, can I get a tank of gas? Can I get enough for dinner tonight? Can you help me with some book bags for the kids for school? Now, you'll quote me chapter and verse. Listen, we got to take advantage. I saw him drive up in a Continental. Yeah, that may be. They may have been begging a ride from somebody, and somebody came by in a Continental and picked them up. It could have happened. The fact of the matter is, we as the church are probably the last line of defense that's able to understand a vulnerable society. We're the last line of defense, able to take the risk to go down into the plunge and understand, not only understanding who people's lives are, where their lives are, but understand where our lives are as well. Because we understand the fact that our faith is more than just simply doing things on the surface and making ourselves feel good about one another. That we're able to risk and see that lives can be turned around when they indeed believe the one who came back and told us the good news. When Luke is writing this section in his account of the gospel, he's challenging those people who are hearing the good news and you don't quite believe it. If someone were to come back from the dead, they couldn't quite understand that. Why would somebody want to do that for me, for you? What Jesus is saying very simply, he said, in the bosom of Abraham, where Lazarus finds comfort. In the bosom of Abraham is where that sense of life and purpose is all about. Where that sense of vulnerability pays off and is lived out with a sense of faithfulness only God can do. We have the law and the prophets, but you also have the resurrected one who came back and preached the good news to the church and said, yes, there'll be a time when we'll be vulnerable. There'll be a time when we feel like we're being hurt. But there are other times when all comes together in such a way that it's so glorious it just lifts us up to God's very presence. And we shout hallelujah as only he can do. And we recognize that our time, our talent, our treasure, our sense of stewardship is more than just simply money. It's the fact that we indeed are living as fools for Christ in order to bring the people of God together, to bring that sense of salvation and wholeness that's there. Barbara Brown Taylor said that the sense of salvation is not something to celebrate at the end of one's life, but it's like someone who has a key who puts it in the lock and unlocks the door and allows those who are outside to come in. What a great metaphor. What a great understanding. Every Sunday, every weekday, when we come and we open the doors to the church, we say to the people, God, come and be with us. That's what we are about. That's what we come to celebrate. That's why we show up week in and week out. I love that when Abraham's talking to Dives, the rich man. The rich man says, send this guy. Tries to boss him around. And Abraham looks at him and says, child, you're not getting it. You don't understand. You didn't do nothing. And you think by doing nothing, you get absolved. Not in the least. We need to do something. We need to be involved. We need to risk it all and be vulnerable to the world that's around us so that others may see the love of Christ in your life and in mine. And when you hear these secular stories being read, look behind the secular story and see that sense of salvation history. When you hear the Christmas carol being read at Christmas time, and when you hear it or you see it on television, be reminded that behind that story is indeed the good news of the incarnation. Behind that story is the good news of a God that came back in sort of such a way as to say to all humankind, you have a place here, you have power, you have love. But it's not the way the world says it. It's the way that I say it. Come and celebrate that as only can be. And if you need to look any further, look at this story and listen to the words of Father Abraham. Child, come to the kingdom that's prepared for you from the beginning of time. Come and celebrate as only God can do. Amen.